Who was the strongest power in medieval Europe? To answer this very unscientific and also pretty unreasonable question in an incredibly limited amount of time, we are going to rely on the simple method of naming one political entity as the strongest, and that for each and every medieval century. Strong is of course a very ambiguous term, but instead of falling down the rabbit hole of semantics, I'll just use it intuitively, as you will see. So let's start with the 6th century. In the craziness of post-Roman Europe, really only one established power remained: the Eastern Roman Empire, which particularly showed its strength during the reign of Justinian, as he recovered many former Roman territories. The first point goes to them. The 7th century. For the Eastern Roman Empire, from now on called the Byzantine Empire please, the 7th century was a transformational period. Being attacked by multiple enemies like the Avars, Lombards and the Arabs, that changed the Byzantines' look from this early in the century to this at its end. But you know what? Despite all that, they still get the point. The Merovingians in the west were struggling mightily themselves. The Avars in the east were only loosely organized and exploitative in their nature. And the power with the biggest impact on Europe as a whole, the Arabs, only started with the conquest of European soil in the 8th century. The Byzantines were slowly collecting themselves again and managed, because of internal struggles of the Arabs, to reconquer some of their lost territories. But the Arabs themselves weren't going anywhere, because since the Abbasids took over in 750, their expansion stopped. But don't worry, they were able to strengthen their empire internally and might have in total been the most powerful military entity in the world, as they even were victorious in battle against the powerful Chinese Tang dynasty. But let's not forget that since 751, the Merovingians were replaced by the Carolingians as the new Frankish kings. The Carolingians, of course, reached their heyday during Charlemagne's reign, who ruled over this entire territory here. But despite all that, the title of most developed civilization and military in Europe at the time still belonged to the Byzantines. So they get the point. But I just cannot resist and have to give the Franks and the Arabs half a point as well. Good work guys, keep it up. But we are now moving on to the 9th century. What a century it was. The Franks and Arabs slowly started to fall apart, whilst the Vikings wreaked havoc over all of Europe. Good times indeed, at least if you were a Byzantine. The point goes, once again, east. I mean, not everything was perfect there, right? Shout out to the Bulgarians. But the Byzantine Empire remained stable throughout the century. The 10th century. With the fall of the Carolingians, we see many new faces in Europe coming to prominence. In West France here we have the Capetians, in East France the Ottonians. In Eastern Europe we see the development of the Polish kingdom and the Duchy of Bohemia. Whilst even further to the east, the Kievan Rus was experiencing its golden age. And the Byzantines? Well, after getting mightily scared by the Bulgarians early on in the century, they recovered swiftly through the help of strong emperors. This makes the already established Byzantines an easy choice over those newbies to the north. Another point goes to the Byzantines. In the 11th century, we finally have the two entirely separated French kingdom and Holy Roman Empire, even if the kings have only limited power, which is sadly not good enough to dethrone the Byzantines, who reached the last high point in 1025. But in 1056, the great Macedonian emperor dynasty ended, and political instability, foreign pressure, be it the Seljuk dynasty in the east or the Normans in the west, started a process of decay. But for an impressive first half of the century, the point goes, once again, to the Byzantines. Moving on to the 12th century, and here we go again. Point goes to the Byzantines. I mean, Manuel I was a great emperor who stabilized the situation on the borders, so I consider it a deserving choice. But I know what you are saying.
What's with the HRE and what with France?
And I think that's a fair question, since both were dominating forces in Western and Central Europe, basically since the birth of the Merovingians in the 6th century. But in comparison to the Byzantine Empire, both failed because of their decentralized nature, which makes it tough to evaluate how powerful they even were. And if you combine that with the Byzantines' cultural and military advantages, I think you get my point. Nevertheless, it just feels right to give at least the Holy Roman Empire, whom I consider more powerful than France during the High Middle Ages, half a point, despite them not being at the best during the Salian dynasty's rule. The 13th century. The Mongols get the point, of course, I mean, what are we talking about? Moving on to the 14th century. At first, let me finally reassure you. The Byzantine Empire won't make any more points. Since the beginning of the 13th century, after the destructive Fourth Crusade, the empire failed to recover again as it was followingly hit hard by the Bulgarians, Mongols and Ottomans. Therefore, when the empire and its capital, Constantinople, finally fell in 1453, it was only a shell of its former self. So, who was the number one then? First of all, crazy times, let me tell you. Little Ice Age at the beginning and the Black Death in the middle of the century caused the European population to actually decrease over those 100 years. Well, talking about the strongest, at the beginning of it, France was regarded the strongest power in Europe, a position they lost however fighting against England during the 100 Years' War, starting in 1337. The Holy Roman Empire saw an internal battle for the throne between the House of Luxembourg, Habsburg and Wittelsbach, but did in an overall sense quite well for itself. In the east, we see a massive territorial union between the Kingdom of Poland and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, and in the southeast, we can see the initial expansion of the Ottomans. We have here a quite equal balance of powers in Europe, which makes it no less difficult to make a choice, but at this time you really can't go wrong giving a point to the Holy Roman Empire and a deserved half point to France for the pre-war strength. Moving on to the last century, the 15th. Renaissance, humanism, technological improvements, religious skepticism, naval exploration. Yes, the 15th century was a period of rapid change in Europe, which is why it's commonly referred as the transitional period from the Middle to the Modern Age. And oh my, it is difficult to name the most powerful political entity at the time. Let's go through the contenders one by one, shall we? Spain was only reconquered in 1492, but definitely had a pretty formidable military at its disposal. Combine that with their colonial conquests and you have a wealthy superpower. But those developments mostly bore their fruits in the 16th century, which is why we have to pass here on this one. France finally won the 100 Years' War and was able to expand with the addition of the Provence region. England, on the other hand, fell into civil war as the House of Lancaster and York started fighting for the throne. The Holy Roman Empire remained the loose federation it has always been, with a rather weak position king/emperor at the top. In the east, we see next to the Kingdom of Hungary and the union of Poland and Lithuania, the emergence of the Grand Duchy of Moscow, which would one day turn into the Russian Empire. Hungary, strong military, but definitely weaker than the one of the HRE. Poland and Lithuania, as well as Moscow, were all very great in size, but can't be called more than middle-level powers at the time. Which brings us to the southeast, where the Ottomans were advancing further and further and actually started to endanger the order of more than just the Balkan powers. So, my final point goes to France, and another half point to the Ottoman Empire, which gives us this very distinct result. According to our little test here, the Byzantine Empire wins the title of strongest power in medieval Europe with 7 points, followed by France and the Holy Roman Empire with 2 points each. And yeah, I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. And I would also love very much to read your opinions about it and see what kind of feedback you can give me. And yes, one thing, don't take it too serious. It's just a fun exercise and has really no other value than that. I hope you have the best of days. Yeah, bye bye, take care.